If warships from China, Russia, Iran, and South Africa are sailing together at the point where two oceans meet, the real question isn't what they're practicing, it's what they're signaling. This week, near South Africa's coast, a joint naval exercise quietly began that involves some of the most closely watched powers in the world. It's happening far from Europe, far from the Pacific, and yet its implications stretch across global trade routes, alliance politics, and the balance of power itself. The drills are officially called Will for Peace 2026, but the timing, participants, and location raise a much bigger question. Is this coordination, or is it positioning? If this cooperation deepens, the global maritime order could look very different. If it fractures, it exposes the limits of emerging power blocs. And if it triggers counter moves, the ripple effects won't stay in African waters. What happens next matters because more than 80% of global trade still moves by sea, and key choke points from the Cape of Good Hope to the Indian Ocean are becoming more politically charged by the year. To understand why these drills matter, you have to start with where they're happening. Simonstown sits at one of the world's most strategic maritime junctions, where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans converge. It's a gateway used by commercial shipping rerouting away from conflict zones like the Red Sea, especially after repeated disruptions in the Suez Canal region. In 2024 alone, shipping around the Cape increased sharply as vessels avoided missile threats and naval incidents further north. That makes South African waters more relevant than they've been in decades. The exercise itself runs for a full week and is led by China with participation from Russia, Iran, South Africa, and the United Arab Emirates. China and Iran each deployed guided missile destroyers. Russia and the UAE sent corvettes. South Africa contributed a mid-sized frigate. Observers from Brazil, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Indonesia are present, signaling interest without commitment. Notably, two founding BRICS members, India and Brazil, chose not to actively participate, and that absence is just as revealing as the ships that did arrive. This is not BRICS becoming a military alliance. Structurally, BRICS remains an economic and diplomatic grouping focused on trade, development finance, and reducing dependence on Western-led systems. But military symbolism matters. Naval drills are one of the clearest ways states demonstrate interoperability, trust, and shared threat perceptions without signing treaties or firing shots. China's motivation here is largely about maritime presence and normalization. Over the past 15 years, Beijing has steadily expanded its blue water naval operations, moving from coastal defense to regular deployments across the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden, and now deeper into the southern Atlantic sphere. In 2023, China operated the world's largest navy by ship count, with more than 370 vessels, and these exercises reinforce its ability to operate far from home ports. For Russia, the calculus is different. Since 2022, Moscow has faced increasing isolation from Western naval cooperation, while sanctions have constrained access to ports, insurance, and logistics. Joint drills like this serve to demonstrate that Russia is not diplomatically or militarily boxed in, even as its fleet faces operational strain. The presence of a Russian corvette in Simonstown is less about combat power and more about visibility. Iran's participation is equally strategic but defensive in posture. Since formally joining BRICS in 2024, Tehran has used multilateral platforms to offset pressure from sanctions and regional isolation. Naval cooperation allows Iran to present itself as a legitimate maritime security actor, particularly as it faces accusations of destabilizing shipping lanes elsewhere. Deploying a destroyer thousands of kilometers from home waters signals endurance and reach, not imminent confrontation. South Africa's role is perhaps the most complex. As host nation and current BRICS chair, Pretoria frames the exercise as a response to rising global maritime tensions and a need to protect trade routes. South Africa has a long tradition of non-alignment and multi-vector diplomacy, but its relationship with Washington has deteriorated sharply. Since Donald Trump returned to office in 2025, the United States has imposed tariffs as high as 30% on South African goods, and political trust has eroded over disputes ranging from trade to international legal cases. This context matters because the drills began just days after a US seizure of a Russian-linked oil tanker in the North Atlantic over sanctions violations. They also come amid heightened rhetoric from Washington toward countries it sees as challenging US economic and strategic dominance. In that environment, even routine exercises acquire strategic weight. Then there's the absence of India. New Delhi remains a core BRICS member but chose not to participate, balancing its economic ties with Russia against an increasingly sensitive relationship with the United States. India imports significant volumes of Russian oil, a major friction point in trade negotiations with Washington. For India, joining naval drills alongside Iran and Russia at this moment risks complicating its Indo-Pacific strategy and its partnerships with Western and regional allies. Brazil's decision to observe rather than deploy reflects a similar calculation. Brasilia supports BRICS as an economic platform, but remains cautious about militarizing the bloc's identity. Both choices underline a central tension. BRICS is expanding, but not in lockstep. Now consider the first what-if scenario. What if these exercises become regular and increasingly complex? Annual drills with rotating hosts, expanded participation, and advanced coordination would gradually normalize military cooperation among countries that share skepticism of US dominance. Over time, this could encourage parallel security architectures, informal, flexible, and deniable, that operate outside NATO-centric systems. That wouldn't mean confrontation tomorrow, but it would mean a more fragmented maritime order. The second scenario cuts the other way. What if internal divisions within BRICS widen? Competing interests between Iran and Gulf states, between India and China, or between economic priorities and military symbolism could stall deeper cooperation. In that case, these drills remain isolated events, symbolic but strategically shallow. That outcome would reinforce BRICS as an economic forum rather than a geopolitical counterweight. The consequences extend well beyond Southern Africa. For South Asia, especially India and neighboring states, the optics of Chinese and Iranian naval activity in the Indian Ocean add pressure to already crowded waters. The region handles nearly half of global container traffic, and even perception shifts can influence defense planning and naval procurement. In the Middle East, Iran's visible integration into multilateral naval exercises complicates deterrence calculations. Gulf states participating as observers or limited partners must balance engagement with reassurance to Western security partners. Energy markets are sensitive to any signal that shipping security might become politicized, particularly after recent volatility. Globally, the deeper issue is trust. Maritime security has long depended on shared rules, even among rivals. If naval cooperation increasingly follows bloc lines, coordination during crises becomes harder, not easier. Misinterpretation grows. Reaction times shorten. And yet, it's important not to overstate what's happening. These are exercises, not alliances. There are no joint command structures, no mutual defense clauses, no permanent basing agreements announced here. Power projection is being tested, not deployed. The real signal is strategic patience. These countries are learning how to operate together without forcing the world to choose sides outright. It's influenced by presence rather than provocation. What should you watch next? Whether India re-engages, whether future drills expand beyond rescue and maritime security into more complex operations, whether Western navies respond with increased deployments around the Cape. and whether economic pressure or diplomacy reshapes South Africa's balancing act. Because sometimes the most important shifts in global power don't come with explosions or declarations. They come quietly, ship by ship, exercise by exercise, until one day the map looks different. And by the time everyone agrees it changed, it already has.